Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Yana Ludwig, running for U.S. Senate in Wyoming, where Walmart is our biggest employer other than the government, which is going to be relevant in a little bit. And I need to make sure that you know this because the FEC cares that you know about this. So, paid for by Yana for WYO. So Dee posted this graphic yesterday, a couple days ago. I can't remember when exactly you put it up, but it's an old thing that that McDonald's and Visa put together in 2013, and it has gone through various waves of getting posted around the internet. And so I messaged my team this morning and was like, hey, I think I'm going to do this thing with this graphic. And I left the room for about 3 minutes, came back, and there were like 23 messages. Like, it really struck a chord with like a bunch of people on my team that that I was going to kind of like troll this thing today. And so I was like, let's actually do this together. And so we've got a bunch of the Yana for WYO core folks here today who were all in this big conversation this morning together. And so I'm going to actually like screen share this graphic that I've added some things to. So let me get down here and do that. Cool. So this is the original graphic, this like green and white part here that has sample across it. And so this was produced by like McDonald's and Visa, and was kind of like how to survive on McDonald's wages, because for some reason they were getting enough flack, God knows why, for not paying their people enough. And so they produced this thing thinking, I guess, that they were being clever and telling us folks who don't make very much money how to like manage our lives. And so, I just want to like walk through this thing with folks. And so the first thing to note is that they depend on you having a second job. Like, they actually have no intention of paying people living wages. And in order to get to something that is even close, you need to have a second job that pays just about as crappy wages as your McDonald's job does. And then this list of what your monthly expenses are is about the most out of touch, tone deaf thing I have seen in years. So the first thing they put on there is savings right up at the top. And like, I literally know nobody who is working a job with this low of wages who is able to put $100 into the bank every month. But they're telling you that this is good financial practice and financial management. And then they got mortgage/rent for $600. Now, this was in 2013, but like, like you can't get a place other than in like the cheapest places possible for $600. And there were a whole bunch of stories on the chat this morning. I don't know if anybody wants to toss in anything at this point, because we had a lot to say about this line in particular and just how out of whack it is.
I mean, just as like someone who has a higher paid job, I still couldn't afford to move out of my mother's house and I live in the living room. And the idea that mortgage rent is $600 is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, totally. We can come back and like talk about rent a little bit more, but I love this car payment. So like, how many people do you know who work at McDonald's who were able to actually like get a car loan because their credit was good enough to be able to have a car payment? And then like $150 a month for a car payment is like most of us drive complete junkers because we can't even get into this game. And like $150, that might get you a car that was like $8,000 off of a used car lot, which means that somewhere in here, there ought to be a big fat line item of like car maintenance and repairs, because like when you buy cheap ass cars, you're going to end up spending a lot of money getting that thing fixed. So this is just like super ridiculous. And then like car/home insurance, like, so somebody's got a mortgage for $600 and a car for $150, but their insurance is only $100. Like the numbers just like super do not add up. And then here's my favorite part: health insurance, $20. Okay, so I'm on the ACA, I'm on the Affordable Care Act, and this is like pretty close to what I make most years. And so my premium is way more than 20 bucks for the ACA, which is like heavily subsidized and discounted rates for the consumer. And there's nothing else in here for like medical bills. So like, you know, you go to the doctor once and you've got a deductible, you've got copays, you've got all of that stuff. But they literally think that you can like have health coverage in the United States for 20 bucks. Okay, whatever. And then heating, zero. Like, okay, so you just like freeze to death, or like what are you supposed to do during the winter if you live anywhere other than like Florida, where like people even have heaters in Florida? So, you know, this is like, and like maybe these two numbers are good. I mean, maybe you can get a phone for 100 bucks, depending on what you need to do in your life. Maybe your electric is just $90. Other for $100. So we have other down here, and then we have this like monthly spending money. So notice there's no food in here. So that's supposed to come out of your other or your daily spending money, goal money. There's nothing about student debt. So like they're assuming that they only employ people out of high school. And like how many sweet gray-haired ladies have you seen working behind the McDonald's register lately? Like I see it like every time I go into a fast food restaurant, which isn't super frequently, but there is almost always somebody older than me working at the register. So they don't have any debt. They don't have credit cards. You have no pets. You have no kids. You have no joy. I mean, like, this is just like the very, very, very super typical classist crap that like basically says like you should have a life that completely and utterly sucks and have to work two jobs to almost get it. I mean, that is basically the message of this graphic. So I just find this whole thing like completely and utterly appalling. And we'll put this back up in a little bit if y'all want to put this back up, but I'm gonna like stop sharing this for a second and make sure that I'm actually saying the other things that I wanted to say. So this is interesting because it's like an $8.25 an hour is what this was based on with like two jobs. So say you just had one job that was paying twice that, $16.50, which would be considered like a good wage in a lot of places, and you have a 40-hour-a-week job. This is still what your budget looks like at like $16.50-ish, like somewhere in there. So they are now paying $10 an hour, but that's still below like their own sort of like highly offensive graphics income level. And so like in some ways it's just like super classic classism. It puts the full responsibility on the worker for not being able to get by. You just have to budget better. Here, let us paternalistically help you figure out what budgeting better means, and like this is the best budget y'all can come up with for that help. Or you just need a better job, but like half the jobs in the US right now pay $20 or less. So who does all of those jobs while all of us are supposed to somehow be getting better jobs? And then do you just switch up like who you're being all like blamey and weird with? Like it makes zero sense. And again, it puts like all the blame on individuals rather than like pointing fingers at the system that has set all of this up. And so I'm going to give you like what my plan is for changing all this. And I 100% guarantee you that McDonald's is going to hate this. And so basically we need to like bring the bottom up with like wages, with healthcare, that kind of stuff, while also bringing the ceiling down, because CEOs make an average of like 361 times what workers make. And so they are actually the ones that are sucking the life out of the economy. Like you can blame millennials all you want for like avocado toast and all of that garbage, but really like they are not the problem. And the fact that they are attempting to get some small bit of joy and enjoyment and health out of their lives, that is actually not what is killing the economy. And so basically the crux of my wage proposal has three parts to it. So number one is set the rock bottom at $15 an hour and include all of those currently excluded categories. So this includes tipped workers, people with disabilities, young people who are new on their jobs. Like there's somebody on this call with me who I could legally be paying $6 an hour because he's like 20 or younger and is in the first few months of his job. Like that is garbage policy. Entry-level military personnel don't even make minimum wage. And so we need to like bring that up so that the absolute bottom is $15 an hour. And then adjust wages up from there using county by county living wage calculators. So you can find living wage calculators. There's one, I think Yale is the one who's done the most thorough batch of it. So that means that in most counties in the US, you'd have a much higher minimum wage than 15 bucks an hour. And then the third part is capping the highest paid employee in the company at 20 times what the lowest paid person makes, including benefits and bonuses and stock options and all of those things that just make rich people richer, not just the number on their paycheck, but actually full compensation, no more than 20 times. And so that wage ratio law means that, like, if McDonald's was wanting to pay their fry cooks 10 bucks an hour, their CEO would only be able to make $200 an hour, only $200 an hour. But like, don't worry about it. You know, CEOs would still be just fine, because with that $15 an hour base wage, they'd be able to make $300 an hour or $12,000 per week, which is still pretty outrageous in my humble opinion. At any rate, they could probably keep their 3 mansions, and they may have to give up a yacht or 2, is basically what that means. So I'm not talking about like really like making CEOs' lives hell, although I'm not sure I care that much, frankly. But what we are talking about is like getting that ratio into something that actually makes slightly more sense. So then there's 3 other core parts of the platform that aren't directly about wages, but are about the context that those wages happen in. So single payer healthcare would also take a chunk of burden off of most companies. So raising wages becomes a lot easier. So companies over $1 million a year in payroll, like McDonald's, would have to contribute to their employees' health care. But a lot of small businesses wouldn't actually need to be doing those contributions at all. So then, like, can we make corporations pay their damn share of taxes, please? And McDonald's, like, isn't even the worst tax dodger out there. I would probably give that award to Walmart, which is Wyoming's biggest non-governmental employer, as I said at the beginning. But McDonald's corporate taxes actually went down by almost 17% in the first quarter of this year, while their profits were up by 3% last year. So that is going in the wrong directions. If they are making more money, they can certainly be paying more taxes. So let's convert that money into healthcare for their employees and actually get them paying their fair share. And the final thing that's in my platform that relates to a lot of this is the workers' first right of refusal law. So this means that if a company ever goes onto the market, their employees would have the first crack at buying the company, with support for that in the form of a low interest loan and help with things like business planning and cooperative decision making. So worker co-ops like that don't screw each other over in terms of their wages. Like, I know of no worker-owned cooperative that has the kind of wage ratios that we have. Most of them try to keep it at like 3 or 4 to 1, so that it's really much more egalitarian and everybody's really taking care of everybody else. And it's part of why co-ops are actually frequently way more successful than other kinds of businesses. So I want to say one more thing and then open it up. So that is that people who are not economically stable and empowered are vulnerable to all kinds of things. So one of them is that we make terrible choices both for our own health and the planet's health. So just to keep picking on McDonald's, because it's so easy to pick on McDonald's, if all I can afford is McDonald's, I'm going to go through that drive-through to feed my kids. And it is the worst food choice I could possibly make for the planet for a whole host of reasons. There's unsustainable agriculture practices with deforestation for beef and for palm oil, and shipping ingredients from all over the world takes a lot of fossil fuels, and it's really heavy on the packaging. And I'm driving to and from the place to get my food. Like, all of this is terrible for the planet. And then there's the slow and steady undermining of my own health, if that's the only garbage that I can afford to put in my body, which is going to lead to me having less energy, less vibrancy, less ability to push back against this kind of complete garbage economic paradigm that we're living in right now, and higher medical bills ultimately. And economic instability also makes us really vulnerable to things like fascism and feeding into that kind of stuff, because it is really easy to pit economically stable people against each other along some line or another. And it's often race or immigration status in the United States that does that. And so these kinds of wages feed into like really terrible things for all of us. Which brings me to want to bring in the rest of the team who are here, because we were having one hell of a conversation this morning on the chat, and just want to like open it up and sort of invite people to talk about what their experiences are and, you know, have been around this kind of stuff. I think everybody on this call has worked for complete crap wages at some point. So yeah, so what do y'all want to share and talk about?
I guess I'll go first.
Right.
Yeah, so we did have a very interesting conversation this morning. My personal part of it, man, there's a lot of this that affects me. Looking at that graphic, I gotta laugh because it's like, you know, it doesn't take, I mean, if you have a completely like normal, no deviation from the mean lifestyle, that might work. And that's a strong might. But nobody lives like that. Like we all have things that are, I don't know, different about us that require, you know, green activity tickets. Me personally, I'm a trans dude. I don't know if any of you knew that, but yeah. And healthcare for trans people is really, really expensive. Because a lot of the time your insurance won't cover it. They either call it elective or they find some other way to not, you know, to justify not paying for it. So all of that's got to come out of your pocket. And when you're 20 years old, like me, and like fresh into college and just kind of getting my feet in the water, it's unbelievably difficult to try and maintain my own personal mental health while simultaneously navigating the financial hardship that comes along for working for $9 an hour. You know, I have medical bills. I have a car payment, which isn't $150. I have rent that's definitely more than that. And so that literally does not leave any room to be, you know, a happy, healthy, transitioning man. And for me, that is my biggest drawback with the way that things are right now, because all of this is this way because of bad policy. And that's the bright line. We need people in office, and we need people that are on our side and continuously fighting for us. Because like I said this morning, at any moment, some legislature could pass that I had no idea even existed, that could completely uproot my ability to be a transitioned man. And that hurts, especially from a country that I know that my parents have served in the military for, that I know that I have loved my entire life. I have lived here. I do love my country, but I want better. And I think that's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Mm.
And for somebody, so I grew up poor, and not for lack of and I think what bothers me too is I'm seeing a lot of people pitting, like, you know, we're seeing like, why should a dishwasher get 15 an hour when a CNN doesn't even make 15? And like to really continue to push against the myth is that we're not against each other as workers. We all need to be paid more. As someone who has in my regular day job pre-COVID as a skilled audio and lighting technician, I only made $10 in school and then only $13 as a skilled trade for part-time work. And again, bringing off that, if my mom had not had health insurance, which by the way, she pays $1,000 for minimum every month for the 4 of us, $1,000. And still had to shell out hundreds of dollars worth for my wisdom teeth to be removed. And those were incredibly painful. And I still haven't, you know, I'm at a year and I won't have health insurance. And I'm pretty sure I won't be able to afford health insurance unless it was heavily subsidized. And so seeing people getting pitted against each other just really shows the idea that we have to fight back with policy against corporations, who are the real people and the real like businesses that are causing us to live a desolate quality of life.
I would agree with everything that's been said before. The other thing is sometimes people say things about like taxing corporations, taxing CEOs. They're like, how could you do that? We didn't do it. And it's like, actually, yes, you did. In these last 40 years, about 30 to 40 years, the rate of taxation on the richest has gone down by 2/3. The reality is that the reason they were able to do so much is because they used those taxes. And then they try and say, we didn't do that. It's like, yes, you did. That's how you were able to fund all these programs and this infrastructure. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that money. And like, honestly, looking at that graphic, it kind of upsets because it's like that graphic you showed, it didn't even count taxes. So like taxes being anywhere 13, 20%. So that means you would have had to work 74 hours a week for that to actually make the spending money they were claiming. And it's like, that's horrible on the human body. I've had close individuals who, because of repeated weeks where you have 70 plus hours, you start seeing health issues, mental health issues, relationship strain. And then it's like you have an unsustainable culture and community because everyone is not meeting their needs. Social, emotional, financial, health, all these needs are not being met. This is not sustainable. And the only way we get through it is because we send out this propaganda that's not like we're better than other places. And it's like, I remember last year I was really fortunate and got to meet some people from like 24 other countries at a 2-week class. And I actually was so amazed hearing stories about what it's like in Europe and the West Indies and Australia. And a lot of what they say is very different from what you hear in the United States about how people feel about the systems, about what sort of services are allowed, about what the services are like, especially, well, healthcare is usually talked about a lot, but also education prices too. And it's funny because even that, I had to take all of my vacation because I was working a full-time job and I had to use all the vacation just to do this sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, so using all vacation I worked all that year and then using all of my savings at that time. And I was like, okay, well, let's see. But I was happy about that experience because it shows that one of the problems is people have this idea of what it's like and that it's like this everywhere or it's better than other places. And it's like, no, you can expect better. And honestly, it's like with relationships, you should expect better. And I think that's one thing hopefully people are starting to talk more about, it seems.
Yeah. And as you're talking about it, like I'm thinking about like in comparison to other countries, like there are other capitalist countries out there, and most countries are a mix actually of kind of capitalism and socialized systems. And the United States, I think, is at one extreme with that of like really not only unchecked capitalism, but sort of, our political system is so much controlled by big donors and big money and lobbyists and that kind of stuff that we actually are sort of subsidizing capitalism that much more. And it requires some of us to be really poor. In order for those profit margins to keep growing and keep growing, that money is coming from somewhere, and it's basically extraction of natural resources and extraction from us. That is the sort of fundamental model of capitalism, and it's not broken. It's actually working perfectly as it was designed to work. It's called capitalism because it's about the accrual of capital, but it's not the accrual of capital for everybody. it's the accrual of capital for those people who are sort of at the top of the economic food chain in the United States. And, you know, and that's the kind of stuff, that's why I talk about things like wage caps on CEOs of like, you know, if we can like put a cap on that part, it sort of cuts off a whole bunch of that motivation. And I had somebody say the other day when I was talking about that, but you know, CEOs, they work really hard. And I'm like, even if that's true, which I'm not 100% sure I buy, but let's just grant that for a second. It's like, so you're saying other people don't work really hard and that they work 361 times harder than most other people? Like, I just don't think that that's true. And I think it's just, you know, we have this thing in the US about, what's the phrase, temporarily embarrassed millionaires is sort of how we see ourselves. Like, someday I'll make it and I'll get to be that person and then I'll be at the top of the food chain. And so I want to preserve this system. And it's like, yeah, so that's like, you know, a 0.1% of people that actually happens for. But like most of us are never going to see that. And so why are we like clinging so hard to the system that's like killing us, you know? Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is the prevailing myth of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yes.
And the only reason why you're not getting to be a millionaire is because you either can't budget enough, you don't know enough about money, or you're not working hard enough. And like that's the myth that we keep getting shoved down our throats. And that's really what it is, just getting shoved down our throats. And that's the way that we should be, you know. If you work hard, you get good grades and you're a good capitalist person. And that's just not how we need to run as a country.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the things is also all these myths about these millionaires made it big because of themselves. They just took the risk and that's it. And I hear this a lot, and it's like, actually a lot of them, like even oh my gosh, I can't think of him, Jeff Bezos, wasn't totally not like, was actually pretty upper middle class or middle class beforehand too. It wasn't like I started on the street. Like, people want to paint this picture of from rags to riches. It's that ideal. And it's like, no, a lot of them had either help from the system around them, resources, connections.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things. And not to say that everyone doesn't have innovation, but there's a lot of innovators who we never talk about, who had great ideas, but they're not millionaires, billionaires. And it's not because they didn't try. Mm-hmm. It's because we have a system that they still use those resources. They just don't talk about it. And that's part of kind of like perpetuating this myth. Mm-hmm. That was all by myself. I didn't get any help from anyone. Rags to riches, you know?
Yep. Yeah, and some of the most creative people died in poverty. You know, like their books were published after they were dead, and you know, it's like we have this idea of like, oh, well, there was this person who's like, you know, was here 100 years ago, and like they wrote this amazing book, and I'm like, yeah, that like couldn't get published during their lifetime. Like they got nothing out of that, and they literally died in poverty. And so, like, I think about that sometimes, like how many really brilliant, talented, hardworking people there are out there who like we will never know anything about their lives, and they're going to die in obscurity, and they could have been, you know, this amazing contributor. And so, you know, I think that that's, you know, the part of me that has like lived in community for all these years and has actually seen social systems where people do get to figure out like what are they really passionate about and what are they really good at, and get the support to do that. Like, I want that kind of thing for everybody, where like, you know, if you are excited about exploring something in your life and contributing something and being creative, that's the life that you get to have, and that poverty is not keeping you from actually living your life. And that's the world that I feel like is sort of motivating a lot of what I do and how I put things together, you know?
And I would like to just mention about Jeff Bezos, there is nothing creative creative or innovative about the way that he earned his millions and trillions.
Right.
He, from the start, abused and utilized a system that was already beginning in its part, destroyed other industries, and created a monopoly on online service. There was nothing innovative about it, and the same kind of system that Jeff Bezos used to confuse his private companies is the same one that got Donald Trump elected.
Yeah.
So I just looked at the math. Okay, I was kind of curious, like the million, billion, trillion. Like I was like, do I have a good perspective on how large those numbers are? Here's something really interesting. A million seconds is about 11 days. A billion seconds is about 31.5 years, and a trillion seconds is 31,709.8 years. Those are
31,000 some years is a trillion. Woof.
And so that makes me think, like, no one needs that much money. I cannot think of any valid reason why you would need that much money.
Right.
And I was more on this, like on working, right? Like I love what you said about, how important it is for people to have economic security because it allows them to be creative, right? Like this is me privately contracting to do film work, for example. Like that is the first job I've had where I actually felt like, wow, I don't hate my life doing my job. I don't dread getting into my car. I don't dread going out to film. Like this, any job, I've worked a lot of garbage jobs, like a bunch of them. And I can tell you that, like, when you're getting paid enough, and when you go and do something that makes you feel good and you have the opportunity to do that, your life gets better.
Yeah.
You feel like getting out of bed. And I think that's a huge problem in our country, is that not only are we broken, like, financially, and not only are we, like, spiritually broken because nobody knows what's going on anymore and everybody just feels rocked by this year. Mm-hmm. We are insecure in that we cannot, like, no one can find it within themselves to access that creativity anymore. Yeah. Nobody can find it within themselves to, express sensitivity, because we've been driven to believe that, like, that stuff isn't necessary. We don't need to be creative. Your whole purpose is to work hard, work your ass off, and then, maybe get to retire at like 80. I'm sorry, that sounds like, a crock of, insert expletive here, right? I cannot fathom a world, and this is a shame, I can't fathom a world where, at least right now, where we're all in, like, good standing with our jobs. We love going to work, and I think that's a problem. I think that we should all enjoy what we're doing, and our system, the capitalist system we have set up right now, is not working. It's killing people. It's driving people to suicide. Like, we wonder why there's an opioid crisis in this country. I can tell you why. People are sad. Mm-hmm. People don't have health care. They don't have anything to look forward to. They can't pay, there's no way to save money. Like, it doesn't matter how smart you are sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're going to end up broke at the end of the month, you're going to end up broke. And that is the sad reality of working your ass off in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and how much capitalism is just poison to all three of those things. And, like, we talk about, like, freedom, and it's like, what the hell does that even mean if you can only afford to rent from slumlords, and you don't, you can't go to college, or you can't even, like, take a couple days off and read a book. Like what does that word even mean under capitalism? And, like, I think it doesn't actually mean much. I think it's like a nice platitude, and it's something that gets pulled out and, like, really politicized. But, like, real freedom for me would be, like, being able to go to the doctor, frankly. Like,
no kidding. Or the dentist. Like, they don't consider dentistry essential, so, like, you got to pay for dentistry out of your own pocket. Newsflash, I know a lot of people that haven't been to the dentist in, like, a decade. Their teeth are fine because they've learned how to take care of them themselves, but I'm thinking, or what, are teeth a commodity?
I think it's been 5 years for me. since
Yeah.
I've been to the dentist. Yep.
Yeah, I don't even want to think how long it's been for me. Like, my teeth are good. I know they're coming in okay. I'm just like, yeah, like I don't even know what a dentist does anymore. Like, what do they do? What do you go to the dentist for? Ridiculous.
Hmm. Yeah, Dee dropped an interesting comment in here that a healthy economy marker is partly about how robust the arts are flourishing, and that like
Absolutely.
about like creativity, there's actually like a deep connection in there to, you know, economic security and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I do want to be very clear, not just the elitist art like we see in a lot of galleries, but in all levels of flourishing, like art communities, from like, you know, community arts to a more elite gallery system. They all are a marker for a good, robust economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think about like all the ways that the first things that get cut in education are often like music and the arts, and like, so we're dealing with all kinds of like really unprecedented stuff right now, ecologically and in terms of our social relationships. And like, wouldn't it be great if like we were actually teaching creativity? You know, because like, don't we need it? And I don't necessarily mean creativity with like you're saying, like the elite, like the capital C creativity, but like just that, like, you know, take risks and think outside of the box and try to like figure things out and engage it in different ways besides just through your like intellect and the boxes that our intellects often have us kind of caught in. And that like, that's about the arts as much as anything else. And I think that like lack of creativity is really biting us in the ass right now, you know?
It leads to less unique problem solving and solutions that can often help us battle these kinds of situations that we find ourselves in. And we see teachers doing that too, because on some level they did learn that creativity, but then are forced to, versus policies against, you know, policies supporting lots of testing, we are unable to pass that on to the kids that we're like sworn to teach that kind of stuff to anyway.
Yeah, I spent a year as the school secretary in a brand new school, and it was a charter school, and it partly turned me off to the whole charter school movement. But I can say that like and we were an elementary school, and like the 3 weeks leading up to testing, like everybody's anxiety was up. People were, you know, snapping at each other. The kids were super stressed out. They didn't even know what was coming. And they were like, they could feel it in the air. And it's just like the whole educational environment melted down for those 3 weeks. And then we spent another week sort of recovering. Like everybody had like this stress hangover for another week. And yeah, I mean, it's terrible for actual creativity. And like, we don't need test scores right now. I think we need creativity in our culture.
Standardized testing, like I'm so glad you brought that up. Like on an educative point, standardized testing is garbage, and I'm talking like all of it. ACT, SAT. You want to know something? The night before the ACT, I think I got dumped, and so I'm like, yeah, you have one bad night, and then I took the free test, and I didn't have money to go and do the next test, so I ended up with like not a great score on my ACT, and I don't agree with that system. I don't agree with putting kids and teachers in that position. Like even the state tests they do every year, like I think it was called PAWS or something. Yeah, they like those tests and stuff, putting teachers through that. I'm like, first of all, you're not achieving anything, because if you get a kid that's had a bad day, they're not gonna do well on that test, so it's gonna bring down the scores. It's not representative. And then you have, you know, maybe a group of kids in the school that doesn't have secure housing, so you're not actually getting a proper statistic on how your kids are doing. All you're doing is stressing everybody in the school out for a number that's not even gonna show you how well you're doing.
I hate testing. I mean that whole standardized, no child left behind paradigm.
Hate it. Like,
yeah.
The only reason I stayed in high school for as long as I did was because of my art classes. I was excited every day to go and throw and to go and paint, and so that's honest to God why I stayed. I was like, I'm not gonna have access to a throwing wheel if I drop out, and it came that close for me. because everything else sucked, but I had my art classes. So when they cut things like that, that shuts the door on kids like me who really, really, really need an outlet like that.
And actually, I totally agree with that, because I think one of the things I remember when I was working for an education grant was ACT knows it actually doesn't predict anything. It does not predict college success. PAWS do not predict career success. None of it predicts anything. It is simply a way to put people in boxes and label them, so that when it comes down to like what college you can go to, they can just say, okay, you didn't reach this guideline, we're just throwing you out. They don't actually get to see the full picture of the person, their life experiences, their knowledge set. There's a lot of people who I've seen passed, like did great on the ACT, but when it came down to it as students, it was pretty obvious they were not going to succeed in college, because really they didn't care about college. It was all they were basing it on was a number, which didn't actually show anything for overall success. And as for innovation, creativity, look at patents. Patents are the hugest joke in the United States. It is a way for us to stomp on other people's innovation, other people's creativity. And honestly, the sciences are about creativity and innovation, but we've actually hindered it. We really have. And it's a shame, because there are brilliant minds that get bought out, that get pushed out. Whether it's in medicine, whether it's in transportation, energy, especially with the new environmental technologies that are coming out, and how there's so many lobbying groups that are like, nope, you can't do this, nope, you can't do this. And they're trying to regulate it in such a huge way that basically what you're doing is you're hindering the development of community, of society. You are hindering it for one thing, and that's greed. And that's basically all of what patents are for, and what we're doing with our sciences. And it's a shame, because there's a lot to be said about the amount of science that's being done in other nations, and about some other nations that are trying to improve those sciences, because they recognize the importance of local regions actually creating the inventions that will help them, because they recognize they know best. They know what's available there, what resources, and how to best implement it so that you're not hindering others in your community. So, yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to mention that this is important to acknowledge that these tests, the current way that we do public schooling, is to see students' level of their ability to be productive. And this goes for a whole lot of intersectionalities of economy and classism and disabilities and race. And for the capitalist world that we've put ourselves in America. And they put us in bad jobs, and we're being force-fed the idea that if we work hard enough, we'll someday get rewarded. And that's just a straight up lie.
Yeah, because those McDonald's workers are not getting rewarded right now.
Yeah, I just want to jump in with one thing as we started talking about McDonald's and the fast food industry, and basically abuse of workers is the way I see it. So last week in Santa Monica, California, Angela Martinez Gomez, who was a trans employee of Burger King, showed COVID symptoms for a full week and was told to keep coming to work. And Angela tragically died. And there is a suit, a co-worker of Angela has filed a complaint with both the state and county authorities because of this death. And this just shows a couple of fundamental things. First of all, I think whenever there's like a popular trend, whether that's Pride or Black Lives Matter, you see corporations jumping on it, right? So Burger King released a Pride burger a couple of years ago in one store in San Francisco, and tried to just basically hop on a really important social movement for their own gain. And I was just reading it earlier this morning, the millions that one burger that earned the millions in social media clicks and trending. And then when it comes to actually standing up and advocating for for the queer community, you're going to get a trans worker and who is treated disgracefully and had worked there for 15 years. That was the saddest thing of this story. Worked working for 15 years and wasn't given time off when showing symptoms of COVID. This isn't just didn't feel very well. This is horrendous. And tomorrow, July 20th, there's a strike for Black Lives, which I think anyone who's watching this should really investigate. It's basically a coalition of Black advocacy groups and unions demanding a couple of things, but I just wanted to quickly read the third demand, which says corporations need to take immediate action to dismantle racism, white supremacy, and economic exploitation wherever it exists, including our workplace. This includes corporations raising wages, allowing workers to form unions. This is really vital, especially in the fast food industry, providing healthcare, sick leave, and expanded health coverage to people who are uninsured, underinsured, or have lost coverage as a result of COVID. And also to disrupt the multi-generational cycle of poverty created by their anti-worker attacks. And it's really important, just to tie this together, I guess, that people of color disproportionately occupy these really low wage jobs, such as the ones at McDonald's and Burger King. And that's exactly it. It becomes a multi-generational cycle of poverty when you can't have a union, when you are getting paid poverty wages, when you're told to have a second job. One job should be enough where you're working, incredibly hard at. And last year, the McDonald's CEO earned almost 2,000 times the median wage of McDonald's workers. Did they work 2,000 times as hard? Absolutely not. No chance. And just the way corporations get around this is they pay a base salary of, say, $1 million, but that's made up with a load of bonuses and additions, which really takes the salary up and up and up. So we should be critical of even reading a salary when they say, oh, no, it's only X amount more. It's like, no. If you add it all together, the entire package, 2,000 times more as a CEO. That's disgraceful. I just think it's important that we just note how oppression, whether it's race or sexuality, is always tied to keeping people to low wages and unsafe workplaces. And, Black Lives Matter, COVID, this is all coming together and showing that it's unsustainable paying people poverty wages because people are going to die on the job, and it keeps on happening.
Yeah. And so I'll just toss in one more little factoid here. So thanks, Glenn. That was a great summary, and also has me thinking about so if Angela Martinez Gomez had kids, think about what that thing would have looked like that we looked at the beginning. And one of the other things that we didn't name explicitly in this session, but we have been talking about a fair bit out on the campaign trail, is that if you look at the statistics with some of these big companies that pay complete garbage wages like Walmart, that your average Walmart store costs US taxpayers an average of $1 million per store per year in social services because they don't pay their folks enough. And Walmart actually pays no corporate taxes at all. And so they're just basically sucking more money out of those of us who already can't really afford to be paying the taxes that we're paying. Some of those taxes that you and I are putting in are going to make up that gap that Walmart will not make up, in spite of the fact that they're one of the most profitable countries and richest families in the country. So so solidarity is super important, and is also kind of the antidote to fascism, which we desperately need right now. I think we're seeing that crackdown happening around the country because, the Black Lives Matter movement has been around for 7 years, I think it was 2013 that it started. And this is the first time that we really have a critical mass of a multiracial uprising happening to support Black Lives Matter. And I think it's part of why the fascism loop has gotten really tight around all of us over the last 3 to 4 months, because that's really threatening to this whole power structure, is when we actually are in solidarity with each other. That's when it starts being a real threat. So on that note, I think we're going to close out for today. Thank you so much, all of you. This was a last-minute invitation for all 4 of you to get here today and do this with me. And I super appreciate you being in the flow and showing up for this. And just remember, McDonald's is not your friend. And that is where we will close. All right. Thanks, everybody. Where's the stop button there?